What's up guys, Shawnthebro here, and today we're going to be going over settings menu part 3. So in the first episode we set up the settings menu appearance. The second episode we set up the navigation with our custom navigation methods. In today's episode what we're going to do is determine what happens when we select these inputs. So as I press confirm on these inputs, we want to make sure that we set these inputs to be selected and then actually set values in the code behind the scenes. That way when we enter the game, they're going to already be enabled. So at the current time, we still can't see our current selection, but I can choose one, such as the 99 seconds, the 90 seconds, the 60 seconds, and the number of rounds such as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever, and enabled or disabled, and that should actually set the value in the game instance, which means when we go to play the game, I then go into this and select my stage. When the game loads, you should see that the timer does not start at 99 seconds. That'll be the main indicator here. So once we get past our character entrances, which we can skip through, you see that it starts at 60 seconds because that's what I've selected last. So what this means is we can actually take the values that we're picking on our settings menu and translate them to the game. We're going to show a pretty cool technique to do this too, because we have our selections like we've done before, like on our character select, stage select, but in this case what we can actually do is determine the specific button we're on, not by rows and columns, but using our functions we set up in the previous episode, and we'll actually be able to just separate the logic for every button. So it's going to make our lives a lot easier when looking at the logic. So settings menu is going to be pretty nice. That's what we're going to be covering today. So if you'd like to get caught up on the series, we are on episode 130 of the Fighting Game Tutorial series. We have plenty more episodes to go, plenty of things to do. So if you want to get caught up and check out everything we've done to date, then feel free to click this icon in the top right corner. It'll lead you to the playlist where we did literally everything you see here. It's all covered in that playlist. Every single mechanic, menu, all that stuff. Otherwise, I'd at least recommend watching the settings menu episodes. So I will link you to the very first one here. This is where we set up the initial screen. Alright, and we can get started. So we are going to actually add some things in code today. We can go ahead and do that in a little bit. Normally I start with that, but it's going to be some additional options and additional settings. So I think we go on with our settings menu logic, and then we will add it in the middle. So I'm going to open up my settings screen widget. And I'm going to scroll in here. Alright, so this is our settings menu, same as it has been. What we need to do is essentially determine what logic is going to occur when each one of these buttons is pressed. Each one of them is different, even though they're in sets, right? So each one of these is just setting the round time, but they're still all different. Number of rounds, same thing. They're all just setting the number of rounds, but each one is a different value. And then the all players on one device, or keyboard mode, is really this special technique for how we want to handle our inputs. And for that we have two different options. So no matter how you look at it, we have different options for these values. So I'm going to make a function for each thing that we want to be able to set. Specifically in this episode, I want to make a function to set the round time, the number of rounds, and this boolean, the keyboard mode, or all players on one device boolean. Now, that's what we're doing today, but there's one important thing that we need to add to the event construct in the event graph here on the settings screen, and that is we need to get our game instance. In our code, we had set up a base game instance quite a long time ago, and we store all of our values that are going to persist between levels and are going to include data that we're saving out or loading in potentially. So we have a lot of stuff in here. The things we care about are the variables we set up for the settings menu, which are the round time, the number of rounds, and is device for multiple players. I've actually gone ahead and added another boolean called is round time infinite. This is because I do have an infinite option on my widget here. You can see I have the infinity sign. which means we don't want the round time to ever run out in versus if this is selected. It'll be required that one of the players wins the round, or there is a tie before the round will end and then start the next round. So you can't win by timeout in this case. Well, since all we're going to be doing is setting the round time to these number of seconds, we can't really set it to infinite seconds. Float won't really accept that in any way. So I've divided it up to have an additional boolean here that will allow us to stop the timer from ticking. So feel free to add this now if you're interested in that behavior. Just a boolean called isRoundTimeInfinite. Make sure it's uProperty and all that so we can actually set it from the settings. And then I would highly recommend setting a default value. As always, you don't have to, but I recommend it. That way you know exactly what the value is going to be when the game starts, when the game instance is created. I set it to false by default. Although this is only intended to affect versus matches, I still don't think it should start infinite by default. It should probably be whatever your default value is for your seconds, which I defaulted to 3 rounds and 99 seconds. So set to false in the constructor, and we're good to go there. Anyway, point I'm trying to make is we need to set those values in the game instance. So we need to have a game instance reference in our settings screen. So right here in event construct, the very first thing I do before I do any of the other listen for input actions, I've just added these 3 nodes. Very, very simple. If you've been following the series, you'll see me do this all the time. But quick reminder, we're going to get the game instance. Okay, this is getting the game instance the engine is currently using when running the game. We're going to cast it to our game instance. That way we can grab it and then take the variables that are in there and the functions that are in there. And then I'm going to go ahead and promote this to a variable. That way I can actually use it elsewhere. So we set it immediately in event construct. This should always succeed unless this cast fails, but again, if the cast fails, it's just because it's not set up properly initially. So this should always succeed for the players. We don't really have anything to worry about there. That is created well before we could ever access this settings screen. Okay. And so what we need to do is in our confirm selection, we need to define the logic for each button. And I know this looks ugly and it's like, oh my God, there's so much stuff, but really there's not. There are only 3 functions that I've made, and I've just specifically checked each button and set up the logic that I wanted to perform when each button is pressed. You could do this a bunch of different ways. All the menu logic, well, really all the logic is, you could always achieve it different ways. So if you find a way you like better, feel free to do that. However, using the confirm selection logic that we already had set up, this was our confirm selection logic. We had a function called determine button to focus, and I'm not going to cover that today because we've covered that in the previous episodes. But essentially, it determines what button we're highlighting, or really what object on the settings menu we're over top of. So if we check that button against, another button, like the back button, we're able to say, okay, we're on the back button, and they press the confirm selection on the back button. Since these are equal, we should then go ahead and do the back button logic. Well, that's perfect. So that means that that's working as intended. We press the back button, so we go back. Simple enough. Well, we can literally do that logic for all the other buttons. The back button was the only one we've done so far, but there's literally nothing stopping us from using that same technique for all of these guys. One thing you'll notice is that I did remove the play sound here. There's a reason for that. We're going to address that later in the episode so that we can make our sound effects a little bit better. We don't want them playing over top of each other, and we probably don't want them playing constantly if it's already the selected value. Okay. So you can pretty much make one additional set of logic under the back button and then copy it, paste it, then you'll have 2, and then I copied my 2 and I pasted them, and I copied those and pasted them until I had all the ones that I needed. So off the false branch. So if this button is not equal to the button we're currently on, false, then we check the next button. And we're literally going to do this check all the way down. So if the current button is then equal to the KM enabled button, If that's true, we're going to set the keyboard mode to be enabled. And I think you get how this logic works by looking at it. You could also do a switch statement on an enum and define your logic there. There's a ton of ways you could do it. I think this is simple enough, even if it's not too visually appealing, so it should be fine. It's definitely fine for performance as well. It's really not going to be too much different than anything else. You're just going to check against every single button. That way we know which one and what logic we should fire. Okay? So we'll finalize this in a second. Let's make our 3 functions. That way we can actually call them and set them up for each input, each button. So I made 3 functions. I made one set keyboard mode, set versus round time, set versus number of rounds. We can start with the keyboard mode one. So it has an input parameter, which you can add by clicking the plus here, of a Boolean, and I've just called it enabled. In fact, let's be consistent and call it is enabled. Okay. And then inside the function itself, it's super simple. We have our game instance reference already. We set that up in event construct earlier in the episode. So all I do is I grab that variable, get it, and I convert it to a validated get. Make sure it's valid before trying to do this so we don't crash or anything. And then what happens is we're going to set the value in there based on the input that the menu gives it. Okay, so is device for multiple players is my keyboard mode Boolean. Assuming this is valid, all I do is drag off my game instance reference and set that variable. Set is device for multiple players equal to the incoming Boolean. Then, if we go back and confirm selection, like I said, KM enabled is this button right here. Okay, so if keyboard mode is enabled, then we want to call our new function, set keyboard mode. All right, and we want to make sure we check is enabled because that's the button we pressed. You'll always know what you're checking because we're checking against the button right here. Keyboard mode enabled. So we should set keyboard mode to be enabled. If the branch is false, we then go to the next one, which is keyboard mode disabled. So if we're on that button and we confirm that, then keyboard mode should not be enabled. So this Boolean should be false. That's simple enough, right? That means that set keyboard mode will always be set to the proper value when coming from the settings menu. It has the default value of false in the code. So if you start the game and you don't go to the settings menu, it's going to still default to false. That won't hurt anything. But then it will always know the proper value when it is set by a player. All right. So let's then go to the next one, which is I did versus round time next. All right. So it doesn't matter the order you do them in. I kind of did them out of order, but it doesn't matter. So round time. So this is how many seconds are in the match, all the way up to the infinite possibility. So I've created this set versus round time, which has both a float and a Boolean. All right. So set versus round time is right here. And I do basically the same thing as the keyboard mode. This one's just a little bit more intricate because of the fact that we have this additional Boolean, but it's still super simple. So we have the float for the time, the Boolean for if it's infinite or not. We get our game instance reference, convert it to a validated get. If it is valid, then we just assign the round time value in our game instance to the time that comes into the function. We also go ahead and set our new variable, is round time infinite, to the Boolean that's passed into the function. And if we go back into confirm selection, we continue on. If it's not on either the keyboard mode buttons or the back button, we're going to hit false again, and we're going to start checking these buttons. RT1, RT2, RT3, RT4, RT5. This stands for round time 1, round time 2, and so on and so forth. So round time 1 button is my 30-second option. So if we're on round time 1 button, and that's what we confirmed, the branch says true, then we call our new function, set versus round time. We pass in the appropriate amount of time, which is 30 seconds. And then I say, nope, it's not on the infinite selection, so we don't worry about that. Continue the chain. Round time 2 is 60 seconds. It's not infinite. Round time 3 is 90 seconds. It's not infinite. Round time 4 is 99 seconds. It's not infinite. And round time 5 is infinite. So I still put 99 seconds as a fail-safe. Technically, we don't want any time to be taken into account if it's infinite, if we're on the infinite time mode. However, to avoid some bugs, you don't really want to just set it to 0 or some default value, because in case you use any logic that says if the round time's out, like we do in our game mode, you could still get a timeout issue if you're not careful. You could still do other logic down the line that screws it up, such as potentially time dilation once the timer runs out, or other menus that pop up. So it's not necessary by any means, but as an added failsafe while we're already here, I went ahead and left the time at 99 seconds, but then made sure we did set it to be infinite. Now, theoretically on the HUD, we'll replace this with an infinite symbol. I actually have not done that yet, but we can definitely update the HUD. Instead of just displaying 99 seconds and it just sits there forever, we could update it to just display the infinite symbol. Again, this is just a failsafe. You can set it to whatever you want. I'm going to keep it at 99 seconds for me and check the box to be infinite. Right? I'm going to go ahead and move this out 1, just so that they're spaced out slightly more than they were. All right, and I'll do that as well. Okay, so now the last thing we have here is the number of rounds. I still haven't done the sliders yet. That will be its own episode. I didn't feel it was right to cram it into this one because they're completely different. So we're gonna have to do different logic for them. We can still do everything in here, like we can still set up logic and confirm selection and everything, but it's not as simple as these other ones, especially if we're going to try and control them with other things like controllers as well as keyboard. So we'll worry about that in a separate episode. So the last thing is number of rounds for the versus mode, which of course I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and as such, NOR, number of rounds 1, relates to 1, number of rounds 2 relates to 2, and so on. So, assuming we're still hitting false on the branch, and we hit true, confirming the number of rounds 1 button, then we want to call this new function. So, let's go over set versus number of rounds. Set versus number of rounds has an integer that I called rounds, and that's the number of rounds that it's going to be either best of or first two. You can do either. In the series, we have it where it's the first one to win that number of rounds. I'll probably make an episode showing best of versus first two. It's pretty simple. But however you set it up, this will still work fine. This is just the number of rounds that we have to reach. So, you probably know what to do by now, but grab the game instance reference, convert to validated get. If it's valid, set the num rounds variable on the game instance reference to be the rounds that are passed into the function. Then in confirm selection, you can see if we're on number rounds 1, I set the rounds to be 1, number rounds 2, set the rounds to be 2, 3, set the rounds to be 3, 4, set the rounds to be 4, 5, set the rounds to be 5. I don't have anything after the false at this point because I don't have any other options they can hit confirm selection on. You could have a default case if you want, like you could default it to the back button or something, just in case the navigation ever got weird, but that honestly should never happen. Right now, do remember that you can technically go up and select these sliders because of how we set them up. They won't be functional right now, so you might get some weird behavior if you're trying to move up on the keyboard into these values and move them. That's okay. It's perfectly normal. They will be functional, I promise, but they're just not right now. So if you notice any weird behavior with them, just remember, it's not a bug on your end. We just haven't set these up yet. I set them up like on the page navigationally, so we can reach them, but we can't actually do anything with them other than using the mouse. You can technically use the mouse if you're not aware. You can actually go in here. I can't see my mouse. There we go. And I can move this. So you can do that, but we can't control them the way we want to control them with a controller or keyboard. All right, with that out of the way, confirm selection's done, and you can use this template or this method to do this for any options you have. So we're going to go over a lot of options in the series. I'm talking subtitles, brightness, gamma, probably accessibility modes, all sorts of stuff. So we're going to be accessing the screen and adding more all the time. So don't worry about it too much, but if there's things that you want to get a head start on and do them, then you can follow the same template. This will work perfectly fine. Now, there's one thing I want to note while we're here before we go and address the sound effects and the timer. So one thing I wanted to note is that with the sound effects on the back button, how I took them out here, our buttons, none of these buttons had sound effects when we were confirming them before. Only the back button did. But instead of just dragging a line from all these and passing them into a play sound 2D, which we can definitely do, we can also put them in these individual functions. I know it seems a little bit weird, but what we can do is only play the sound effect if this is a value that is different from the value we have assigned. Okay? And so what I mean by that is in set keyboard mode, this is all we had done, right? But what we could really do, if you wanted to get a little bit fancier, because right now, let me give you an example, actually. So we play sound 2D, okay? We can pick a random sound. I'll pick the confirm sound. Now, when I am on the settings menu, if I press this input, it's going to keep playing that sound, spamming over top of itself as many times as I press it, even though it's the selected option. We've already said we want to have keyboard mode enabled, so there's really no reason to keep playing the sound effect when we confirm it. You could, there's nothing wrong with it, but a lot of games don't do that, just to make it not so annoying. It's up to you if you want to leave it or not. If you don't want to leave it, though, I'll show you. It's pretty simple. Basically, we can grab the value that we are going to set is device for multiple players. Okay. Clean this up for you a little bit. This out of the way. All right. So we can grab the value that we have here. Is device for multiple players, and we can drag it into a branch. All right. And we want to see if this compares to equal Boolean, the value that's being passed in here. All right. So you see what I'm saying? We can say, is device for multiple players, is that equal to the value that we're passing into enabled? If it's not, we set it. Okay, so if it's not equal, we set it. And then we can play the sound effect here. And so we can then play our sound. Let's do the confirm sound, because that is the proper sound. And now only if these are not equal, meaning a new selection was made, do we want to set it. All right? So you'll notice if we go into the settings menu and we click this, then it'll only play when we're choosing a new option. It's not spamming itself. And that's exactly what we want. So there you go. You can do this for all your options. You also don't need to set it if they are already equal. You could. It doesn't hurt anything. You're setting it to the same value, but might as well not if you don't have to. We will also in the future, most likely the next episode, want to go ahead and set this as like a selected option so that instead of being the current option that the user is on, it still shows up as like this is the selected one. Okay? Because right now we don't know other than which one we pressed, which is incredibly annoying, especially when we are going through and say we set this years ago and we're picking up the game again. We want to know what our options are. So that's another good way to, another good thing we can add here or somewhere similar, because we may not want to update the actual appearance of the button if it's already been updated to a certain value. If you wanted to get really fancy, you could even take it, play this specific sound, and take that out of these functions and call them after the fact in confirm selection, depending on a Boolean result. That's up to you if you wanted to do that. I don't really mind, because you could also play different sound effects for each button or for some of the buttons if you wanted to. So it doesn't really matter. It's not going to hurt anything in this case because it's still going to only be one sound effect that plays. But if it bothers you to keep adding that play sound to each of these functions, you could do that. So let's do this for the other ones just while we're here. We might as well. So you see we have round time and is round time infinite. So this one is a little bit trickier because we do have two variables that we're accounting for. All right, it's basically the same thing, so don't fret, but we want to do this. Okay, so instead of checking for each individual option, what we want to do is we want to check if the round time, if both of the settings are the same. Because if both the settings aren't the same, then you're not on the same option, plain and simple. So we can get the round time, just like this. Okay, let me see if I can clean this up a little bit. Try to make things as clean as possible for you guys so you can see it. Okay. Something like that is pretty clean, I believe, anyway. Could also space these out another one if that helps. There we go, something like that. So what we want to do now is we want to get our round time, and we're gonna probably want some more space here. We want to compare our round time equal, and we want to compare it to the round time that's passed in here. Okay, straighten this. But the problem is that's not quite enough. We actually want an AND Boolean because we want to compare the other case as well. So I move this down. We also want to compare our is round time infinite and compare it and see if that's equal to the is round time infinite that's passed in. Actually, what would be easier than doing this to avoid an extra check if we do not equal? So if we did not equal and not equal, okay, meaning that both of these have to be not equal. So sorry, pass in round time again, pass in the is round time infinite again. If round time is not equal to the passed in round time and round time infinite is not equal to the passed in is infinite, then we know that neither of these conditions are equal to what they were previously. So then we can do a branch. And in this case, if we do it this way, what we're actually looking for is true. We want to make sure they are not equal before setting them. Okay. All right. Make sure you don't forget to play sound 2D here. So you just go ahead and confirm. And there you go. Sorry, actually, I'm using the wrong form here. We want to make sure that if round time is not equal or round time infinite is not equal, not and. We don't want them both to have to be different, but only one has to be different. There we go, just like that. All we have to do, you already know the technique at this point, is we are going to grab our num rounds. We are going to clean it up. Okay, and we're going to check equal and see if this num rounds is equal to the rounds variable that's being passed in. And actually, you know what? I'll give you every possible scenario. So you could do equal and branch with a false, or you could do num rounds not equal to the rounds that is passed in with a branch, and then check if it's true. So you can pick whatever one makes more sense to you. Make sure you go ahead and play your sound effect 2D in this case. And I'm going to do same one, confirm. Okay. And with that, all this is done. All of our confirm selection is done. We play sound effects at the right time. With that said, we should go fix up our back button sound effect, because if you noticed, I removed it. It's not here anymore. So the simplest way to do that, you'll realize in confirm selection, we're actually calling the P1 back event, which is an event in the event graph right here, P1 back. And they all the different methods of pressing back filter into the same place. So I actually just went ahead and called it at a random point. I called it at the very end before we remove this widget from the parent. We can't do it after that, otherwise it will not play. But as long as it's in this logic somewhere, we want to play our back sound effect, which for me is whoosh 2. And there you go. So now all of your settings menu will have sound effects, and you can configure how you want them to play. If you want them to play every time, or only if you select a different option every time. And that's mainly it for today's episode. There's one other thing I want to show you. We have to set our values in the game mode to actually get them to trigger. So it's like this. If I go to my default game mode BP, and if I go to the code so you can see what I'm talking about, we have these variables in the game instance, like round time, num rounds. But in the game mode, I also have round time, num rounds. You'll notice that this is not a value that is in the game instance. This is in the game mode. So they're called the same thing right now. You could change the names if you want, but remember the reason we set this up initially, all those episodes ago. The game instance can override. It's like the default. It's like the settings or the options for that mode that you're in. If you're in story mode, they have to be configured a certain way. The game mode is what we're currently pulling from. So this round time is the current round time. Num rounds is the current number of rounds for that match. All right. So they are different. It's important because you need a maximum, which is the game instance, and then you need the current. Now, you're going to want to set these values based on the game instance values. There's a lot we can do with that. And I'm actually going to show that off mainly in the next episode because there's so much we can do with it. And there's a lot of places we actually, unfortunately, have to change because we hard-coded. I'll show you them now. If we go to round time, you can see we have all these set round times. And some of them default to 99. This one I took out, which I'll get to in a second. These are new ones that I made. You see there's more 99s. So instead of setting these to 99, we want to set these to the maximum value set up in our settings. But there's actually an even better way to do it than just setting it hard-coded here. Okay, and so I don't want to cover this in today's episode because there's actually quite a bit of logic we can do to better this. And we can even move a lot of it to the code, which would be better for performance based on where things are getting called and some other things I'll cover when we get to that point. So don't worry, I'm not just leaving you hanging, but I wanted to give you an example. I want to show you how to set the round time. So if you wanted to go ahead and do it in here, you could and have it fully functional. But I also wanted you to be able to test it and make sure your stuff is working before we go over the method that I want to use to fully reset everything to the default values for the game instance. Now, one thing to note, in begin play, I'm manually setting it to keyboard mode. This is something I was just doing because I use keyboard mode more. You technically don't have to do this anymore. You can do it through the settings menu as long as you set this value to the default value in the constructor of the game instance. However, I'm leaving this here for me. So if you see this in my logic, note, I'm just telling you, this is for me because I use keyboard so much. I just want to set it here. No matter what the default setting is in the game for the players, this is for me. So you can keep it if you use keyboard a lot like I do. I'm just showing you I did not change that even though we have the ability to remove that now. But in the end of level streamed in, this is the important logic here. At the end of level streamed in, we scroll all the way to the right. We were setting round time to be 99 at the start right here between these two nodes. I took it out, I disconnected it. If you want to now use the game instance values as opposed to these hard-coded values, you can use this method for everywhere. Basically, take away any hard-coded sets of round times or num rounds. And then we have a game instance reference that gets set in begin play, actually, where I was just showing you. Begin play is called before level streamed in. So this should be set and valid by the time we stream the level in. And what we want to do is we want to grab our game instance reference and convert to validated get, just like we always do. And we want to grab the appropriate variable, like the round time from the game instance, and set it to the game mode's round time. So you take a look at this. If I set round time, I have game mode settings right here. If I uncheck context sensitive, and I set round time, you can see I have the game instance set round time and the game mode set round time. We want to set the game mode's round time based on the game instance's value. Okay? So by doing these three nodes right here, that is what allows us to make a selection on the settings menu, and when we get into the game, it is configured based on the game instance values. I've only done it for this. I will be covering the rest, but again, I have a better way to do it than just hardcore setting it from the game instance. So that's going to be all covered in another episode. But if you would like to make your logic work now, feel free to just update all the sets we have, such as in the time over function. So if the players get a timeout, or in the reset match values function. If you followed the series directly, you'll probably have these events or functions, and you'll notice that I've set round time to 99 in these places, in which case you'll want to update them with the method that I was just showing you right over here. Okay? Otherwise, just hang tight for the next episode. When you check out the next episode, you'll see how we can update these all to the game instance values a lot easier and honestly a lot more efficiently. Anyway, guys, that is all I got, so thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, please subscribe. It does more for myself and the channel than anything else you can do, and I just really appreciate it. I want to give a huge shout out to my YouTube membership and Patreon supporters and subscribers. Thank you guys for everything you do and for continuing to support me day after day, week after week, month after month. I really appreciate it. I'm so grateful that you guys are excited about these templates. I love making these episodes, and I'm really glad that I can help out any way I can. Anyway, guys, if you had any issues with this tutorial or any of my tutorials, feel free to join the Discord community. I'd be happy to assist you and help you out with anything that you need. Anyway, guys, like I said, that's all I got. So thank you so much for watching. I'm Shawnthebro, and I'll see you in the next one, guys. Goodbye.